Welcome back to another edition of Components Breakdown. Today we are looking at an exciting new dice rolling game with a deck building twist called Quarriors. Quarriors is the brainchild of two of my favorite game designers, including Mike Elliott of the Thunderstone series of games, and Eric Lang, who has created such titles as Warhammer Invasion and Chaos in the Old World. In this very creative, fast-paced game, players will take on the role of Quarriors, who are essentially mystical warriors who have the power to capture and unleash dangerous creatures and spells in order to gain glory and earn their rightful place as the champion of the realm. Using several popular mechanics of current deck-building titles, in addition to a whole new approach on this genre of games, Quarriors opens up the possibility for a new avenue of creativity. So we'll start off with one of the most appealing aspects of the game and what drives the gameplay: the game's huge number of dice and components. Quarriors is truly a very unique game, and after looking through the game's use of components, it doesn't take one very long to validate that statement. And although deck building games have been all the rage for these past 3 years or so, the introduction of dice into the system, along with varying card abilities, creates something that is both peculiar to initially digest, but also very simple and intuitive to understand after a few rounds of play. The game centers around two particular sets of components: cards and dice. Now, where most games in this genre use cards to regulate the flow of the game's pace, Quarriors instead uses its cards as a static reference only, replacing the attacking, defending, purchasing, and scoring portions of the game with a large set of custom dice. To better understand this, let's first explain what comes with the game and how it's set up. Quarriors includes a deck of cards that are broken into 3 distinct categories. There are 3 basic resources, 10 sets of creatures, and 5 different spells. The creature and spell cards are actually broken down even further. For each creature in the game, there are 3 different cards that represent them, all of which share the same artwork but provide different costs and abilities. There are also 4 different spell cards for each of the 5 different spells, again, all of which share the same artwork but provide different sets of abilities and costs. This aspect is where you get a large portion of the game's variety from one game to the next, as cards are drawn randomly during the setup, assuring that although one game might have the same set of creatures as the last, their abilities most certainly will be completely different. Each of these cards that I've just mentioned also has a set of custom dice that relate to those particular cards. The facings and symbols on these dice relate both back to the card that they represent, as well as a generic set of actions that players can spend those dice to partake in. These actions can include everything from quiddity, which are used to purchase or capture new dice from the wilds, to bursts, which allow players to partake in a dice's special abilities. Now, to set up a game, the players will first find the 3 basic resources and place them in the center of the table, placing 2 dice on the assistant and 5 on the portal. Next, players will divide and shuffle the rest of the cards into 2 stacks, those being the creature cards and the spell cards. 7 creatures and 3 spells will be randomly drawn from both decks and placed under the 3 basic cards, creating what is known as the wilds. When doing this, players will make sure that only one class of each creature and spell are used, discarding and replacing any duplicates that are drawn. Players will then find and place the 5 dice that match the color of each of these creatures and spells into the wilds, with any leftover cards and dice being returned back to the game box. Next, each player will choose a colored bag and matching glory marker that they will place next to the glory track that marks each of a player's scores. Finally, each player will take 8 quiddity dice and 4 assistant dice, placing and mixing all 12 of them into their dice bag. Although Quarriors is a very simple game to play, there is a lot to cover, so I'll focus my efforts here on just the turn structure of the game, which should give players enough information to at least walk into it with a basic understanding of the game's flow. A game of Quarriors is played until one of 2 conclusions are reached, those being the first player to reach a particular glory score on the track, which is dependent upon the number of players participating, or if at any time there are 4 or more empty creature cards in the wilds with no available dice on them. The game is played in turns, with each player completing 6 total phases. Now before we start though, let's first cover the gameplay areas that are controlled by each of the players. Each player has 3 tableaus, or imaginary areas in front of them that consist of a player's active pool, a ready pool, and a used pile. The active pool is essentially that player's hand and consists of the dice that the player will roll on their turn, allowing them to cast spells, summon creatures, and gain immediate effects as well as quiddity. The ready area is where the player will place all of their readied spells and creatures that they have summoned, while the used pile serves as the typical discard pile, which is effectively a collection of their spent dice. During the first phase of a player's turn, they will first score points for each creature that has survived a full round of play in their ready area. Those points being equal to the amount of glory that is shown on that creature's power card. After points are scored, the player must then move all of their creature dice from their ready area to their used pile. During this same phase, players may also cull or decrease their collection of dice from their used pile equal to the amount of creatures that scored on that turn. Now this ability effectively allows players to thin out their collection to be more effective with their pool of dice. Next, the player will draw 6 dice from their bag and add them to their active pool or hand, rolling those same dice and enacting their abilities, which include everything from the ability to reroll dice or drawing and rolling additional dice from the bag. After the player is done rolling, they will move any of the spells that they rolled into their ready area at no cost in quiddity. And most spells have the ability of sitting in their ready area from round to round until they are spent or used by that player when needed. Spells have the ability of either enhancing creature attacks or defense values, or even allowing players to earn quick amounts of glory. Players will then have the ability to summon any of the creatures that they rolled, paying quiddity from their active pool to their used pile, equal to that creature's summoning cost, which is located in the dice's upper left-hand corner. In Phase 4, that player will have the opportunity to attack each player with those creatures that he summoned into his ready area. Each creature has an attack and defense value that are also located on its die. And although combat in the game is incredibly simple to understand, I won't go into depth on how it is resolved. But the overall focus and goal of summoning creatures and attacking with them from round to round is to reduce or even eliminate your opponent's creatures, and to have yours survive for an entire round of play, so that they score glory points for you at the start of your next turn. Once the attack is complete, the player is then allowed to purchase 1 die from the wilds, placing it into their used pile, and to do so they will spend any quiddity that is left in their active pool equal to the cost that is located on that card's upper left-hand corner. Last, the active player must then move any unused active dice they did not use that turn into their used pile, effectively ending their turn. And once again, this is going to carry on from player to player until either there are 4 or more empty creature cards in the wilds with no available dice on them, or a player obtains enough glory to end the game. I've had the opportunity to play Quarriors just over a dozen times now within the past 72 hours, and I'll keep this very simple and to the point. Quarriors is a fantastic game. In a market that is now becoming very saturated with imitation titles, what you won't find here is an overly burdened, mechanically compromised game that tries to simulate deck building with a new twist by adding dice. And that's because everything about Quarriors is meticulously designed to create a quick, fun, and expressive light deck building style game that just oozes quality and personality. And although the introduction of dice may seem gimmicky at first, it's so perfectly executed by these two designers that you have to wonder just how far they can stretch this groundwork into future expansions. We've now played the game with 3 groups of our friends, and it's always difficult to gauge just how well liked a title is until players have sat down and had the opportunity to play through the game at least a couple times. With Quarriors, we have yet to find a single person who didn't sit down and almost immediately say that this is a must-buy purchase for them when it is released. It's so unique of a game that it just grabs people's attention and draws them in, and that could be for a couple of different reasons, including the game's simple mechanics, its ease of play, or the huge amount of beautiful custom dice that are included. Whatever it is, mark my words, Quarriors is going to be a huge hit of 2011. No doubts whatsoever, and is easily one of the most creative and enjoyable experiences in gaming for me this year. So that is Quarriors. I am Jeremy Salinas, and thank you very much for watching.